Alrighty, what's going on, everybody? Before we get into this podcast, I want to ask you guys to please go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. 80% of the people who watch my YouTube videos are not subscribed, so it really helps my channel grow if you touch that subscribe button. And also, touch the like button. It's free as well. It's right next to the subscribe button, so just touch both of them while you're down there. And thank you. Have a great day. What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another podcast. Today we're doing my sister-in-law, Carlee Hayes. She's a dietitianist in Tacoma, Washington. And she's basically just going to talk about all diet and exercise and stuff like that. So with that being said, I'll let her give a little background about what she does, and then we'll get rolling.
Thank you, Sam. Hi. Yes, my name is Carlee. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a dietitian, like you said. So I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I work in Tacoma, Washington. So I've been a dietitian for about 5 years now. And first off, right off the bat, I was in just general outpatient counseling. So I did a lot of talking to people with all different disease states. So diabetes, heart disease, just people seeking weight loss, celiac disease, you name it. I worked with it all. And that was really cool because I kind of got a little bit of everything. And I kind of was able to see what I liked and what I didn't want to work with and just learn a lot about all the different disease states. After that, I went into more of a specialized role as a bariatric surgery dietitian. So I worked with people that were going through either gastric bypass or gastric sleeve and helping them navigate their nutrition through that whole process, because there's a lot of changes that go through that. And I think through those two roles, I got frustrated with a lot of things. And the number one thing was that I was seeing people really far into their lifespan, and they already had a disease state, right? So they already had diabetes, or they already had high blood pressure, or you name it. And so I was really helping them manage the disease versus help them prevent that disease in the first place. Okay. And that's kind of where my passion is, I think, is just helping people prevent disease and live their healthiest life. Mm-hmm. So what I do now is I work more of in a preventative role. So more recently in the last year, I've started at a small technology company called NutriSense. And what we do is help people with preventative health by monitoring their blood sugar, or their, actually it's interstitial fluid glucose is what it's called, through a CGM. And that's what I'm wearing right here.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay. So your passion is essentially preventing diseases from happening rather than just kind of managing them. How preventable is like diabetes and stuff like that, in your opinion?
So there's actually been recent studies that from the World Health Organization that show that like 80% of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all of those things like stroke can be prevented or at least delayed by early lifestyle intervention. So like diet, exercise changes. So like 80% of these things can be prevented. And that's shocking, right? Like, yeah, we have a control over it and we can make a change. It's just that I think there are some things in our society that are lacking that allow us to do that.
Yeah. And also it's like, I don't know the numbers exactly, but if you look at like a third world country like Africa, there's basically no heart disease, no diabetes or anything like that. I don't know if it's because their lifespan's not long enough to where they can develop that stuff, or is it just because they're malnourished, whatever the word is, and they don't have the ability to develop those kind of diseases.
I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. You're probably right there, but I think there's a lot of things in our society that work against us. Yeah. And number one is our diet. Yeah. Obviously, I'm a dietitian, so that's going to be my big focus, but we have a lot of really, really highly processed, really refined carbohydrates in our diet. And those are normal, right? If you go down the snack aisle, there's granola bars, juice, cereals, just all these processed things that are really far away from the actual food that they came from. So I think that's a big barrier, is that that's what's cheap, that's what's available to us. And there's not a lot of incentive to go with other routes. Yeah, and also a lot of these things are branded as healthy, I feel like. So what's your opinion on that? Because I mean, everybody wants to brand their food as being healthy, but like what percentage of food is actually healthy for you to eat that you can just buy at a grocery store? Oh, man, that's really frustrating. So when it comes to health claims that you see on foods, No, they're all misleading.
Hmm.
Uh, for instance, there will be a claim that says like no added sugar on a certain food. But that doesn't mean there's no sugar in that food. That doesn't mean that if you're choosing that food, it's a good choice. And these manufacturers know that. They know that we're looking for those words. So they'll put those on there so that people trying to make good decisions choose those foods, even though if you look at the actual ingredient label and you know what you're looking for, there's 20 grams of sugar. And maybe it's
Yeah.
not added, it's already in that food. So it's really hard to navigate at the grocery store today. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a dietitian and I know these things, so I can understand that people that don't have that experience, it's even harder.
Yeah. And also, I don't know what the year was exactly. You probably know when they were forced to add the like nutrition label that tell the nutrition facts, but it wasn't that long ago that where they just didn't have to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, it wasn't that long ago. And the big thing with, like I mentioned with the added sugar, that wasn't required to be on the label until really recently. So
Yeah.
um, it's hard to understand the labels and it's really hard to know what you're actually buying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about, in your opinion, what a healthy person looks like.
Okay. Yeah. So when I'm looking at a healthy person, this is a challenging question, I would say, to the least, because I think the first thing that people think about is weight, right? Like, what does a healthy person body size or weight looks like? And I firmly believe that there's no one correct body weight or body size, and that there can be healthy people at all different body sizes and body weights. Our society focuses just on weight, and I think that's really unfortunate because it takes away from the things that you can control. If you're only focused on your weight, that feels really limiting and like maybe you're stuck where you're
Hmm.
at. But when I'm looking at a healthy person, I'm looking at four different things. Number one is diet. Of course, I'm a
Okay.
dietitian. When I'm looking at diet, it doesn't have to be perfect, but like I mentioned, a healthy diet is going to really work to eliminate or at least minimize how much processed foods that you eat. So we're looking at whole foods, where you know where they came from. So if you're going down the produce aisle, right, you know where those foods came from. A healthy diet, a healthy person is going to focus about 80% of their diet on whole, minimally processed foods. And then the other 20%, they can live a little bit, they can have some fun,
Hmm.
throw some Oreos in there and enjoy those things in moderation. But really trying to stay consistent with those good habits.
Okay.
If you've ever known somebody that's been on a diet and they're like, okay, this week I'm on track, I'm good, and then this week, oh, maybe I fell off, right? So
Yeah.
it seems to be like this black and white thinking when it comes to diet, but really a healthy person finds a balance in between that.
Yeah.
So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two would be exercise, of course.
Okay.
And I think with exercise, it's kind of the same line. It needs to be consistent. So it does not have to be a CrossFit, like super intense workout every single day. But if you're getting consistent movement in all the time and you're moving your body the other 23 hours of the day, just small walks throughout your day, that's a healthy person in my book. And then I'm a big proponent of resistance training. So at least incorporating that like twice a week, I think is a healthy person in my book. Okay, so third pillar would be stress or mental health. And when it comes to that, I think this is probably the most neglected one in our
Yeah.
society. I see this all the time in my users at NutriSense is that stress can negatively impact the way your body works in all different ways. So if you're not managing that, especially with everything that's going on today, you're really doing a disservice to yourself. So whatever your stress management is, for me, it's hiking. But for some people, it could be like meditation or just like a hard workout or playing a game on your phone or breath work, whatever it is, doing that at least a couple times a week to manage that stress level.
Yeah.
Um, and then last is sleep. I
Okay.
think about 1 in 3 Americans don't get enough sleep, and too little sleep can really impact your glucose control. It can make you crave foods that aren't so great for you. So at least getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep and prioritizing that every night, a healthy person does that.
Yeah. And I know as a athlete, Coach Ryan Smith, my wrestling coach, that's one thing that he would just preach all day in and day out before a meet. I mean, he'd want us to be asleep by 7 o'clock at night so we could wake up at 7 in the morning to get to weigh-ins, get like 12 hours of sleep. And
Oh,
it's
100%.
extremely important. Yeah. So you think this is probably an ongoing battle, but in your opinion, what is more important? Is it diet or is it exercise?
So that's a, I think, controversial question, but in my book, if I had to choose, diet. I think that if you've ever heard the saying, like, you can't outwork a bad diet, there's a lot of truth to that. And the way I like to think of it is our body literally takes the foods that we eat and converts it to the cells that make up our body. So we quite literally are what we eat. And when you think of it that way, it's super important, right? That's what you're fueling your body. That's what you're making your body up with. So if you're putting bad ingredients in, you're probably going to get bad things out of it.
Yeah.
But that being said, like, exercise helps your body use the foods that you eat efficiently. If you're not moving your body for workouts, or like I mentioned, just like gradually throughout your day, you're doing yourself a disservice. So they're both important, but if you're unable to move a lot, or if you have like physical limitations, that just gives you more reason to focus on your diet and include foods that are good for you. And if you do have some limitations, I always tell people like a lower carbohydrate diet might work better for you, just because you're not able to burn off what you're eating as much.
Yeah. And I've always heard the analogy of like a car. If you want your car to go far, you have to put good gas into it. If you're putting horrible gas into it, it's not going to go very far. And it's the same thing with your body. You got to put good fuel into your body for it to run correctly. But yeah, so switching gears a little bit again, talking about the pandemic that's going on. How has that affected your job? And then also in the long run, because I know I don't know how it is in Washington right now, but gyms have been closed for like 2 months in Iowa, a month and a half or 2 months, and they just reopened like a few days ago. Yeah. So obviously people are going to be gaining weight, which you say that people focus on a lot, and probably at home not eating the best because they don't want to go to the store as much and stuff like that. So in the long run, not just right now, how will that affect your job and the job of many people like you?
That's a great question. So what it's done to me just in the short term, so in my job, I guess I should say, I mostly counsel people on how to make their diet better, to make their glucose better. And we can get into that a little bit more if you want. But what it's done now is less people have extra money to spend on something that's not essential. So I would say this is pretty non-essential. It's a fun thing. It's a really cool thing that you can do to better your health. But when you don't have enough finances for like your house payment or food to eat, that gets put on the back burner. So that's a big thing that's affected me, is just people not having money to pay for dietitian services. But also because we are making a little bit less money and we're a small startup company, I've been able to learn other roles. So I do like the marketing for my company now. I'm in charge of social media just because I've had to, right? So I've learned new roles, and that's kind of been fun, but definitely a challenge, and it's been different for me. In the long run, I've seen a lot of our users, like we talked about, have extra stress. And when you have extra stress, you're going to crave certain foods, you're going to crave sugars, you're going to kind of lack that portion control that maybe you do better with when you're not stressed. But also your glucose is going to be really high. So what I'm doing is monitoring glucose, right? And we'll get into that. But it's been really high, and I can see that in people's data. And so trying to counsel them through that, I think, has been difficult. Like you mentioned, the gyms have been closed, so that's an outlet for people sometimes, and they don't have that. So I've been helping people find things that they can do at home, or, ways that they can move their body in a way that feels good without the gym. And that's been a struggle. And I think it will be for some time to come.
Yeah, so let's hop into the science of glucose reduction and why that's important. Because I'm sure, like most people, I'm ignorant to that. So let's talk about why that's important and why an overdose of glucose is probably pretty bad for you.
Yes. Okay. So I mentioned that my company does CGM technology. So that's this little device that I'm wearing right here. And it's quite literally a continuous glucose monitor. So when you think about glucose in your body, like we all think about glucose as sugar. And so we think of it as, oh, we're eating sugar, that's going to be our glucose. But really the body converts the foods that we eat into glucose in our blood. And that's what it uses to fuel our body. So glucose inherently isn't a bad thing. It's our fuel. It's our energy source. And we need it to live. But like you mentioned, too much of that good thing can be a bad thing. So if anyone knows someone with diabetes or that has some blood sugar issues, they probably use one of these guys, right? This is a little glucometer.
Okay.
And what it does is you like finger prick yourself to measure your blood sugar at any given moment. So that gives you like a snapshot of what your glucose is doing at a certain time. And so people might do it when they're waking up or before a meal, after a meal, to see how their body is responding to the foods that they eat. Because each food that you eat can affect your glucose differently. You know, we talked about how like processed foods, refined foods can raise your blood sugar up. Whole foods, like, I mean, it's different for everybody, but those can have a little bit lesser of an impact on your blood sugar. So this is really helpful to see your blood sugar at a certain point in time. Now, back to the CGM. The CGM measures your glucose 24/7. So you put this in your body one time, and it will measure your glucose for 24 hours a day for 14 days. So instead of just like a snapshot of your blood sugar at one time, it shows you like a time lapse of what your glucose is doing at every given moment of the day.
Okay.
It's really, really cool.
So that's kind of the future of like diabetics almost.
Yes, yeah. So what's frustrating about it is like, yes, if you have diabetes, you probably could get one of these if your insurance covers it. But if you don't have diabetes and you just want to see what your blood sugar is doing, it's not typically available to you, except through our company, right? So NutriSense is one of the first companies that allows this to be available to people without diabetes.
Okay.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit about diabetes, because I know everybody has heard of it, and everybody knows there's type 1 and type 2. But I can't, if somebody told me to tell you the difference between type 1 and type 2, I probably couldn't tell you the difference. So maybe talk about the difference between type 1 and type 2, and then just what diabetes is.
Yeah, definitely. So type 1, typically this is when your body is not producing enough insulin. And what that means, so if you think about blood sugar, right? That's coming from foods that we eat. That's our body uses that to fuel our body or to fuel the rest of our day, right? Insulin is the key that helps that glucose get into our cells so that we can use them. So if you think about type 1, they don't have enough of that insulin. So they're not able to use their glucose well. And that can lead to really high blood sugar values because they're not using it, so it's staying in the blood. And typically with type 1, it's diagnosed early. Like you might see it in kids or early adulthood because a lot of times it's genetic. With diabetes type 2, there is a genetic component, but we can develop it as well through lifestyle factors. And this is more characterized by like insulin resistance. So it's not that your body's not producing enough insulin, it's that your body's resistant to insulin. So you have it there, but for some reason your cells are like, nope, I'm not taking it. I'm going to leave the sugar in the blood. So that's kind of the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alrighty, so before we hop into the second part of the podcast, this clip that you're about to see was actually an afterthought that we wanted to throw in. We thought it was really important information, so that's why it's kind of a weird jump cut here. But we put this in here, and then the conversation will carry on normally. So thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good day.
Alrighty. So yeah, one of the things that's really frustrating is that it is preventable. A lot of these things are preventable. But when you go get your labs done at your doctor, right, like you're doing, you should do that once a year, go get your labs. They're only going to tell you when something is at a range that needs to be diagnosed. So just for an example, let's take fasting blood sugar. So say you go to your doctor and they're doing just like a yearly annual lab. They're going to test your fasting blood sugar, so your blood sugar after about 8 hours of not eating anything. And they're going to look for that to be under 100. So if it's not above 100 or at 100, they might not say anything to you. But in my research, an optimal fasting blood sugar is between 70 or 90, right? So say you go in and your blood sugar is 97. They might or might not say anything to you, even though that's 7 points above what's optimal. So because they can't diagnose it yet, they're not going to say anything because they're always focused more on the management, the treatment of the disease versus the prevention, right? So at that point, when your blood sugar is 97, you have the opportunity to make some changes and really see some good progress and some good results. But if you don't know that information, how can you make a difference, right? And the other thing that's really frustrating is that if you're trying to make a change, the feedback isn't there. So what I mean by that, like say your goal is weight loss, right? And you want to lose 20 pounds. You're doing all the things that you should, you're moving more, you're eating better, but that scale isn't moving, or it's really, really slow to move. How many times do you hear this from people?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, all the time.
And so what happens is they're not seeing their hard work pay off, at least not quickly. And so it's hard to stay consistent, and it's hard to maintain those habits because you don't feel like you're getting anything out of it. What's the point if I'm not seeing any movement? And so things like this, things like step trackers, things that can kind of reward you immediately, and so that you see the benefits of what you're doing pay off in real time, that's important, because you can say, wow, I ate this food and man, my blood sugar is high, or man, I had this really sedentary day today and I don't have any steps, right? So if you're tracking it and you can see immediate payoff, that's going to keep you more consistent. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I like that too. That's extremely important. And I haven't really thought about that, because humans are like, we want to see immediate gratification now. It's like the analogy of like a frog. You put a frog in like a pot of water and start boiling it. The frog's not going to move until even though they're in a boiling pot of water, if it's not immediately affecting them, they don't really care.
Yeah.
So,
and then it's too late, right? It's too late to make a change. And then you feel like you're stuck with what you got.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about how, like with the CGM, it's measuring your glucose over time. And I sent you some pictures, so if you want to show that, the first picture that you can see that glucose, we kind of want it to stay within a range of about 70 to 120, right? And our body works really, really hard to keep it in that range. So that's good. That's where we want it to be. Those are optimal levels. And that first graph that I showed you, that's all normal values. You can see it's all in the green. It's where we want to be. Okay. And then second graph, glucose is going high, right? It's going above that range that's normal for our body. And our body's still working really, really hard to bring that back to normal range. But for some reason, it can't. And what happens is that if you have blood sugar that's high, or interstitial glucose that's high for a long period of time, we can bring some damage to our body. So like you mentioned with the car analogy, like if you're revving up your car all the time and you're making it work over and over, it's going to start malfunctioning, and it's going to start not behaving like you want it to. Okay. And our blood sugar works the same way. So if it's up above the level that our body responds well to for longer periods of time, that can cause oxidative damage, inflammation, and then that can ultimately lead to insulin resistance and then type 2 diabetes further on down the road. So the thing about this is that it's really common. We always think that, well, if I don't have diabetes or if I don't have prediabetes, I don't need to worry about it. But the studies show us that 1 in 3 people have diabetes in this country, and 90% of those people don't know it. So we're not monitoring it, right? Like, how would you know if you didn't monitor it?
Yeah. That's a huge number of people. That's crazy.
It's crazy. And there was a recent study, and this was in 2018, that showed that 88% of Americans are not metabolically healthy.
Okay.
88%. Like, that's huge, right?
Yeah.
And that, when I mean by metabolically healthy, that means they either have high glucose, which is what I'm monitoring. They have high triglycerides, high cholesterol, a large waist circumference. So something in their metabolism isn't working right. And that's happening more often than we think about. So there was another study, and this was in 2016, that showed that 93% of the people in the study had high blood sugar levels that were not normal for someone without diabetes. 93% of people. And I've been monitoring my glucose for a long time. Sam, you know me, you know that I eat pretty healthy. Like, I do pretty well, and I've had blood sugar levels that are high, right? So I've seen it in my own data. I see it in the people that I work with. It's really common, but we just don't monitor it. And that's where this can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Like, so what you're basically saying through that data is that this is a problem for basically everybody. So maybe talk a little bit about, like, before you develop diabetes, are there health effects to having high blood sugar?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I noticed when I started monitoring my blood sugar is that when my blood sugar or my glucose increased really high or dropped really low, I felt like energy changes or maybe some cravings, or I'd have like an energy crash. And that's all related to your blood sugar. So if you're not keeping like a very stable, we call it the rolling hills of blood sugar, then you can have really intense energy and then drops, or you can have some mood changes. And we see that a lot. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see in the short term. And then long term, like over and over and over again, if your blood sugar is getting that high, that's when it can get to the bigger issues that we talked about.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So also leading into that, talk a little bit about, because I hear people say a lot, well, I would eat healthy, but it's expensive. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know your opinion on that. So maybe talk a little bit about the costs of healthy food as opposed to maybe not healthy food.
I think definitely one of the big factors that make it difficult for people to eat well, like you mentioned, is the cost. And I don't know why this is, and I think this is something that we need to really, really change, is that processed foods are a lot cheaper. They're a lot more affordable than fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fresh meats, all that stuff. Those are expensive. And for people that are on a budget, especially like in a pandemic era, it's sometimes really difficult to get those higher quality foods. But I always think of it as you are getting what you pay for, right? So if you're buying ramen, it might be 20 cents, or I don't even know how much ramen costs, but you're not buying very many nutrients or anything worth quality. So you're only buying what you get.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that think that eating healthy is like, it doesn't taste good, but I can tell, like, when I stayed in Washington with you, like your meals are like the best I've ever had. So it's like the idea that these things don't taste good, or it's just a complete myth too.
Yeah. And I think that too. I think people think that if they're trying to eat healthy, they have to eat like salad and chicken and that's it. And that's not true. There's so many foods that are healthful foods that you can make taste really great. And it doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah, and also there's a sudden, like if you don't want to go full out, there's little things that you can do. Like I was talking to my sister when she's obviously a vegan. There's little substitutes for everything. Like maybe instead of drinking whole milk, you can drink whatever that's healthier, almond milk, or even with like you can substitute your rice for like quinoa or whatever it is. So there's certain things that you can do, like little, that will change and help a lot.
Yeah, definitely. The biggest things that I say that people can do, number one, is trying to avoid any liquid calories. So if you're drinking, whether it's like juices, sodas, sugary coffees, even Gatorade, like all that stuff is things that, first of all, if you want to cut costs, those are not cheap and you don't need them to survive. So you can cut those out and you can replace those with water or tea or things that are a little bit better for you, and can save some money that way too. And then, like you mentioned, there's swaps for things that you can do. So I'm trying to think of some easy ones, but you mentioned the quinoa. That's a really good one. I think processed meats can sometimes seem really cheap and healthy, but you can get like cheap meats that you can prepare in batches and meal prep throughout your week to make it easier to make that healthy choice.
Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit about the top diets for people who want to make a change, but not only that, but the top diets people will actually stay on, because the idea, like if you want to go on a diet and you actually want to change, you have to stay on that for like indefinitely almost. So it's maybe more of a lifestyle change than a diet.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, is that you can't think of it as a diet, because that indicates that it's going to be a temporary change. Yeah. But I see it over and over and over with people, is that like if you do something for a short period of time, you can probably achieve a certain goal. But if you go back to quote unquote the normal way that you eat, it's going to go back to the normal way you were, right? So it has to be something that you can find consistency in your diet. So if you tell yourself you're going to be like strict vegetarian, but you hate vegetables, that's probably not a realistic change for you. Or like a lot of people right now want to go keto, and if you don't love meat, or if maybe you want some more carbohydrates in your diet, that might not be as consistent or sustainable change for you. So it has to be something you can stick with. Again, you're avoiding that black and white thinking. So it's not this week I'm on my diet, tomorrow I messed up, I'm off. It has to be something you can find some balance in and enjoy certain foods while still making about 80% of your diet really good quality choices.
Okay. What are some top exercises for people that want to lose weight? Do you suggest like not high intensity, but just a thing that you'll stick with? Or do you suggest like high intensity 20-minute workouts? Like what would you go with?
That's a hard question because I think, again, it's really individual. So
Yeah.
if you hate running, probably not realistic for you to say, I'm going to run a 5K every day. You know what I mean? So it has to be something that you enjoy, number one. I am, like I said, a huge proponent of strength training, whether that's body weight, resistance bands, or actual weights. Incorporating that into your week, at least twice a week, can help you boost your metabolism, burn more calories throughout the day. Especially for women, we have a harder time maintaining our muscle mass and our bone density as we age. So including that at least twice a week can really help. And it also helps your glucose, right? So we store glucose in our muscle. And the more muscle that we have, the more storage space that we have. So it's not sitting around in our blood causing those higher numbers and all the damage that we talked about. So strength training twice a week. And then a lot of times I think we focus on, okay, what's my 1 hour workout of the day going to be? But we are sedentary the other hours of the day. Yeah. So small moves, especially after meals, can really help you metabolize your foods better and stay at a good glucose range, right? I'm always focused on glucose. Yeah. Other exercises, I do think there is some benefits of high intensity interval training. So I hear a lot of times, I don't have time for a big workout, or I don't have time to go to the gym. If you pick 10 exercises or even like 4 exercises and do those like 2 to 3 times, one set every single minute for like a 20-minute workout, that's going to give you a lot of have you done an EMOM before?
No, but that's what you're talking about. That's what I've been doing since the gyms are closed. It's like I pick 5 exercises and do like 3 rounds of like supersets to them. And that's, yeah.
Exactly. So I always like to do EMOMs, and that's every minute on the minute. And what that is, like 4 exercises, like maybe you do push-ups, air squats, lunges, and tricep dips. And then every single minute, like set a timer, every minute you're starting that next set of whatever exercise it is. And then the time between your finish time and that next minute is your rest time. So if you do that a couple times through, you're going to get your heart rate up. You're going to get a really quick sweat in, and you can do it virtually anywhere.
Yeah. So what's your recommendation for, I know that I do like 2 days on, 1 day off. So what would be your recommendation for that? Because obviously most people aren't realistically going to work out every single day of the week. So what would be your like golden zone?
I think it's different for everyone. So it really depends on your total stress level, because exercise definitely is a micro stressor on the body. So you want to take into account, like, am I having a lot of extra stress in my diet or in my lifestyle in which this high intensity exercise is going to be harmful for me, or is it going to be good? So looking at your total stress load and then telling yourself what's realistic for my schedule. If you are working 12-hour shifts 4 days a week, maybe 3 days a week is a good goal for you. If you have a little bit more time, then maybe you could set a goal for 5 days. But also knowing where your starting point is. If you are just getting into exercise, maybe setting a goal for twice a week. If you're like just trying to ramp it up, maybe trying to challenge yourself to 5 days a week. So again, looking at what's sustainable for you, what you can be consistent with, and then what's realistic for your schedule. Definitely giving yourself at least 1 rest day. Doesn't have to be where you're doing nothing, but like an active rest day where maybe you're just walking or doing some yoga, whatever you like, every single week.
Yeah, so there's a big theme that I see with what you recommend is that it's individualized. There's not one thing is not going to be perfect for everybody. So maybe talk a little bit about how somebody could figure out what the right diet and what the right exercise plan is for them.
Oh, 100%. So that's the one thing. Not the one thing. That's the biggest thing that I've learned from wearing a CGM and monitoring my glucose, is that how I respond to foods is going to be completely different than how you respond to foods. Good example of this is I work with another dietitian, and we're about the same age, about the same activity level. We're really active. We eat pretty much the same foods because we're both dietitians. And I can eat sweet potatoes and my glucose stays steady. She eats sweet potatoes and spikes up, right? And that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid those glucose spikes. But when you think about it, like sweet potato is something they tell everyone to eat because it's quote unquote healthy.
Yeah.
And so even healthy foods can respond differently based on your genetics, your hormones, your metabolism, your microbiome, so your gut health.
Hmm.
So you really have to experiment with what works for you.
Yeah.
There's no one size fits all diet,
Yeah.
not at all. And if anyone tells you that there is, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think you have to experiment. It might be with a CGM. If you want to do that, that's awesome. If not, you can get one of these at the store for super cheap. If you don't want to prick your finger, I understand that too. Talk to a dietitian, see what maybe would work best for you for your health goals, or track your progress in another way. You can log your foods and track your weights, or excuse me, how you feel throughout the day to see what's working, what's not, and how you can tweak it to meet your goals.
Yeah. So before we got on here, I just quickly Googled, and you can find this on just Googling, and it'll pop up in the black text. You don't even have to click on anything. That 40% of American adults are obese, with 7% being severely obese. So
Yeah.
is there a cultural aspect to that? And along with that, how do we go about changing that?
Oh man, I definitely think there is a cultural aspect about it. I think the traditional recommendation is we're eating too much and we're moving too little, right? Excuse me. And I do think there is some truth to that, right? We are eating higher calorie density foods. We're not moving as much. We're more sedentary. So that's definitely a factor. But I think the big thing is we've moved towards a diet that's very, very processed. So starting wherever you're at, I think people, if they want to make a change, they can look at the quality of their diet. Instead of looking at just the calories, they can look at, okay, where are the foods that I'm eating coming from? Do I know where this product was from, or am I looking at an ingredient list that has 30 ingredients in it? You know what I mean? If you are trying to make a change, if we want to change the obesity epidemic, it's got to start with the quality of our food. And like we talked about, there's a lot of factors that we don't have much control over. And that's like the cost of foods. We don't really have control over. But if there's a way that you can make it work in your financial state, so like for me, I think meal prepping and planning is huge. If you kind of just like plan what you're going to have for the week, doesn't have to be like a huge menu plan, but just in your head, having an idea of, okay, what are the things that I'm going to eat? How can I make them more nutritionally dense and more based on whole foods versus something that's convenient and out of a box or a drive-through? I think that's going to make a huge change for most people. And then reducing sugar. This does not mean that you have to eliminate sugar. Sugar is not the devil, but we do eat too much of it in our diet. So figuring out where you're at, and then slowly reducing from there.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of getting towards the back end here, but what is a really misplaced food put into the healthy side when really it's unhealthy? And obviously it's individualized. Obviously, what you're talking about, it's personalized, that some foods are healthy for other people and some aren't for other people. But what would you say is a food that's branded as healthy when really it's not? Is there any that pop into your head?
There's so many. There's so many. Okay, so there's been a couple that I've tested using my CGM. And again, I'm trying to avoid those foods that cause high blood sugar spikes, because that can lead to damage to our blood vessels over time, but also those energy crashes that we talked about. And a couple of things that have caused that. Juice. So I think we always say, like, if you're drinking like a serving of juice, that's a serving of fruit. No.
Yeah.
When they have juice, you're pulling out the fiber, you're pulling out all of the things that are in that fruit to make it digest slowly. And so it's affecting your blood sugar really quickly. The other thing to think about too is one glass of juice is like 4 servings of actual fruit. So like orange juice, right? It took 4 oranges to get that one glass of juice. So instead of feeling full from eating 4 oranges, you're not going to feel full because you're drinking the sugar from 4 oranges.
Yeah.
So juice is number one. Another one that's kind of sometimes surprising is gluten-free foods. So we always think that gluten is not a good thing for the body. And many people, that's the case, right? Like they don't tolerate it well. It doesn't make them feel very good. And if that's the case, by all means, you can eliminate gluten. But gluten-free products, so like gluten-free breads or cookies or crackers, are still highly processed, sometimes even more so than like products that contain gluten. So just because it says gluten-free doesn't mean that it's healthy. That's number two. And if you are gluten-free, there's a lot of whole food items that are naturally gluten-free, like meats, cheeses, fruits, vegetables, all those sorts of things are gluten-free. Beans, tofu. I mean, the list is endless. Most whole foods don't have gluten in them. And then granola, that's another one. I think we think of like, I'm going to eat a good breakfast. I'm going to eat some granola on some yogurt. And the truth is, if you're getting like a Yoplait yogurt, that's probably got about 3 teaspoons of sugar in it. And then you're putting granola on the top, and that has about 3 to 4 teaspoons as well. So the recommendation is to reduce your added sugar, but in that one breakfast, you're having 7 teaspoons of sugar. Yeah. So always looking at, okay, how processed this food is, and then does it have any added sugars? Is it a whole food item?
Okay. Yeah. So are there any last minute thoughts that you have that pop in your head? Any ideas that you want to run with for a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to nutrition, always remember that you have the power to make changes before it becomes a disease. But you have to do your own experimentation, right? So you are in control of your health, and no one else is going to do it for you. So just because you read online that something is healthy, or your Joe Schmo from across the street is doing it and they're doing great, that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So do your work and find what works for you, and work with somebody who knows what they're talking about that can help you find what's going to work for you. We always say at NutriSense, data over dogma. What that means is, don't just blindly trust what someone says. Do what's right for you using your own data. I fully understand that not everyone can monitor their glucose, or probably even wants to, but if you can monitor other things and get your labs done and make sure you're staying on top of all of those things, that's going to help you out a lot. So individualize your diet, personalize for you, focus on whole foods whenever you can, and then start where you're at. Know yourself and know what you're able to do with your own body and your own lifestyle, and go from there.
Alrighty, so closing out here, is there anything that you want to plug? You can plug your social media accounts, you can plug your company, and I'll leave the links to all the stuff that you plug in the description below this video.
Awesome. Yes. So if people are interested in NutriSense, they can follow us on Instagram at NutriSenseIO, or you can go to our website to learn more. It's nutrisense.io. You can also follow me, Carlee Hayes, on Instagram. I'll be posting some glucose experiments soon.
Alrighty. Thank you so much.
Thank you.